My name is Tilda, and at 39 years old, I was on trial for treason. In the sterile, unforgiving chill of the military courtroom, I watched my father, General Alistair Crane, systematically dismantle my life with a series of carefully chosen lies. When he used the memory of my dead mother, Eleanor, to paint me as a lifelong disappointment, I knew this was his final move. But he didn't know that for years, I'd been preparing for this very moment, for this exact betrayal. And as he spoke, I held onto the secret that would become his ruin. 2 simple words that would ignite a war. If you have ever been publicly shamed by the one person who should have protected you, hit that like button right now to show you believe it's time to fight back. And to let me know you're standing with me on this, just type the single word, justice, in the comments below. Your support means everything. To understand the weight of that moment, you have to understand the room. This wasn't a civilian court. This was a military tribunal, a theater of absolute power where careers were made and broken. I sat bolt upright, my hands clasped in my lap, the only part of me that betrayed my tension being the press of my nails into my own palms. I was Captain Tilda Crane, and the charge was so absurd, so perfectly engineered by my father, it was almost brilliant. I listened to his voice, a deep resonant baritone that had commanded armies, now aimed at me like a precision-guided missile. I could feel the contempt radiating from the bench where Judge Thorne sat, a man whose career my father had personally sponsored. It wasn't just contempt for me. It was for anyone who dared to question the established order. An order with General Alistair Crane at its apex. I no longer felt the sharp sting of pain. It had been replaced by a hollow, terrifying void, the dead calm before a hurricane makes landfall. My lawyer, a young earnest captain from the JAG Corps named Elias Vance, was trying his best. He was outlining my service record, my commendations, my flawless performance reviews. He was building a logical, rational defense. It was pointless. General Crane cleared his throat, a soft, almost perceptible sound that was, in reality, a command. Judge Thorne immediately held up a hand, cutting Vance off mid-sentence. "Captain Vance," he said, his tone bored and dismissive. "We don't have all day for this. This recitation of irrelevant accolades. Get to the point if you have one." The humiliation was a physical presence in the room, thick and suffocating. Vance's shoulders slumped for a fraction of a second before he straightened them again. But my father wasn't finished. He wasn't just attacking my career, he was coming for my soul. He leaned forward slightly, adopting the air of a grieving father forced to confront a painful truth. "It's not just about professional conduct, Your Honor," he began, his voice softening with feigned sorrow. "The instability. It's always been there." He paused, letting the silence hang, ensuring every eye was on him. And then he delivered the killing blow. "I remember Eleanor, my late wife." He looked down, a perfect portrayal of a man lost in a cherished memory. "She stayed up for 3 straight nights sewing Tilda's first formal party dress. She poured her love into every stitch. And what did Tilda do?" He looked up, his eyes finding mine across the room. "She spilled a glass of red wine all over it before we even left the house. Then she locked herself in her room and cried for hours. She couldn't handle the pressure. She couldn't bear the spotlight. Always, always a disappointment." He had done it. He had taken a sacred memory, the memory of my mother's love, of her tired, happy eyes as she held up that beautiful satin gown. And he had twisted it into a pathetic anecdote of my failure. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. But something he didn't count on happened. As the name, Eleanor, left his lips, used as a weapon against me, something inside me didn't just break. It vaporized. It wasn't pain that I felt. It was a boundary. The final one. The line he had just crossed was the last one I would ever allow him to draw. Slowly, deliberately, I rose to my feet. The movement was silent, but it sucked all the air out of the room. I didn't do it with anger. I did it with a clarity so absolute it felt like ice water flooding my veins. My spine was a rod of steel. I knew, with the certainty of a sniper lining up a target, exactly what I had to do. I met my father's gaze, His performance faltered, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He expected tears. He expected a breakdown. He did not expect this. I let the silence stretch, a taut wire of anticipation. Then, I spoke. My voice was not loud, but it was clear, and it cut through the room like a surgeon's scalpel. Nightshade Initiative. 2 words. They were not a threat. They were a verdict. I saw it then. For the first time in my 39 years of life, I saw pure, undiluted panic in my father's eyes. The mask of the decorated general, the grieving patriarch, the concerned father. It didn't just crack. It shattered into a million pieces. His face went white, the color of bone. The room exploded into a controlled, frantic chaos. 2 JAG officers rushed to Judge Thorne's side, whispering urgently. My father stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape, the carefully constructed edifice of his power crumbling around him. Elias Vance, my own lawyer, stared at me, his expression a mixture of awe, astonishment, and a healthy dose of fear. Judge Thorne, his face now a mask of confusion and alarm, banged his gavel. This tribunal is in recess. 60 minutes, clear the courtroom. I didn't watch the fallout. I didn't need to. I turned and walked, my steps even and measured, towards a private waiting room. As I moved, I slipped my hand into my uniform pocket, my fingers closing around the cool, familiar brass of my mother's old compass. It felt warm against my skin, as if her strength was flowing directly into me. The real battle had just begun. The heavy oak door of the waiting room closed behind me, shutting out the frantic whispers of the courtroom. The silence was a sudden, heavy blanket. 60 minutes before I had to walk back in there and face him. My hand, still trembling slightly, slipped into my pocket and closed around the brass compass. Its weight was familiar, its cool surface a tether to a world beyond this cold, sterile room. As my thumb traced the familiar engraving of my mother's initial, E for Eleanor, the present dissolved, and the memories, long compartmentalized, flooded back. It started with the day the lawyer came to our house in McLean. I was home from college for the summer. I remember my father, General Crane, greeting the man with a brisk, dismissive handshake, assuming my mother was merely adjusting the terms of her charitable foundation. He retreated to his study upstairs, to his world of maps and tactical books, leaving my mother and me in the sun-drenched living room. But Eleanor wasn't there to discuss charity. With the quiet, unshakable calm of a person who knows their time is limited, she instructed the lawyer to rewrite her entire personal will. Every stock, every bond, every piece of property that had come from her family, the inheritance my father had always regarded with a certain disdain, was placed into a trust. For me. After the lawyer left, she took my hands in hers. Her skin was thin, like parchment, but her grip was firm. "This isn't about money, Tilda, my love," she said, her voice a soft but resolute whisper. "This is freedom. Your father, he took mine, in his own way. I will not let him take yours." Her will wasn't a financial document. It was a quiet declaration of war. A final, protective shield she was raising for me from beyond the grave. That was my mother's world. It was a world of warmth and quiet strength. The memory of my father's world was a different temperature entirely. It was a long, perpetual winter. I remember the dinner table in our grand colonial house, polished mahogany that reflected the cold light of the chandelier. The only sounds were the precise, rhythmic clinking of silverware on porcelain. My father never spoke of feelings. He spoke of 3 things: Pentagon politics, the strategic blunders of other generals, and the inexorable upward trajectory of his own career. He never once asked about my friends, what book I was reading, or what I dreamed about when I wasn't studying. My existence was measured in performance metrics. I brought home an A in American literature once, my heart swelling with a foolish pride. I showed it to him. He glanced at the report card, his eyes flat, and asked, "And your physical fitness scores? How are those?" In his world, anything that could not be quantified, that did not serve a direct purpose in the pursuit of a military career, was a frivolous waste of time. It was worthless. The day I received my acceptance letter to West Point was a perfect example of this. I found him in his study. He read the letter, gave a single, sharp nod of approval, and said the only words of encouragement he could muster. Good. Don't embarrass me. Later that evening, my mother came into my room. She didn't say much. She just set a small tin on my bedside table, filled with the oatmeal raisin cookies I loved, still warm from the oven. Tucked inside was a handwritten note. I still have it. My dearest Tilda, it read, they will teach you how to be a soldier, but never forget how to be human. All my love, Mom. That was the difference. He gave me a command. She gave me a compass. Our house was two separate countries under one roof. The top floor was his territory. The study, with its scent of old paper and lemon polish, the walls covered in maps of foreign campaigns. It was a world of order, logic, and cold calculation. The ground floor was hers, the living room where her grand piano stood, where she would fill the tense silence of the house with the melancholic beauty of a Chopin nocturne. It was a world of oil paintings she'd done herself, of vases filled with fresh flowers, of the constant comforting scent of something baking in the oven. I lived in the space between, a translator moving between two warring nations. From him I learned discipline, strategy, and how to build a fortress around my heart. From her I learned compassion, the value of art. And that true strength wasn't about how loud you could shout, but how long you could endure with your grace intact. I knew, even then, where I truly belonged. My heart was always downstairs, in the world of things that could never be measured by medals or rank. The memory I pushed down deepest was the day of her funeral. It was a cold, miserable November day, the kind where the rain seems to fall with a unique, gray sadness. After all the somber-faced politicians and military brass had paid their respects and departed, it was just the two of us left, standing by the freshly covered grave. My father stared at the headstone, his jaw tight. "Your mother was a good woman," he said, his voice flat, as if delivering a final, dispassionate assessment, but too soft for this world. I didn't answer him. There was nothing to say. His words hung in the damp air, a final, casual dismissal of the incredible strength he had never been able to comprehend. As he turned to walk back to the waiting town car, I lingered. I took her compass from my pocket and placed it gently on the marble headstone, a silent offering. The cold rain soaked through my black dress, but I didn't feel it. I made a promise, a whisper only the wind and my mother could hear. "I'll live a life strong enough for the both of us, Mom," I vowed. "I will not let him define me. I will not let him break me." Back in the sterile waiting room, the memory faded, leaving a trail of sorrow and steel in its wake. I looked down at the compass in my hand. That promise had become my true north. It had guided me through the grueling years at West Point, through deployments in hostile lands, and it had guided me here, to this moment. It was time to honor it. The four walls of the waiting room began to close in, the air thick with the ghosts of my past. My father's betrayal in the courtroom was a fresh wound, but it was nothing compared to the one that had been festering for 3 years, the one that had led me here. The name Nightshade Initiative was not just 2 words. It was the key to a locked room in my memory, a room I rarely dared to enter. My mind was pulled back, plunging into the dust and fire of Afghanistan. It was 3 years ago, at a forward operating base humming with the constant drone of generators and nervous energy. I was Major Tilda Crane then, and I was staring at the plan for Operation Sandstorm. On paper, it was perfect. Too perfect. The intelligence file was thick, the satellite imagery crystal clear, detailing a high-value target in a supposedly isolated compound. But my gut, an instinct honed by years in the field, was screaming that something was wrong. There was a discrepancy between the official weather reports and the subtle atmospheric shifts I could see in the live drone feed. A brewing sandstorm. I got on a secure video link with the command center. "Colonel," I said, pointing to the screen. "The intel suggests clear skies, but the pressure is dropping and the dust patterns are wrong. If a storm hits, we'll have no air support. I recommend we postpone." The colonel on the other end, a man I'd never met, his face a bland mask of impatience, didn't even lean in to look. "Major," He sighed, his voice dripping with condescension. The Pentagon wants a win. They want results, not your hesitation. Follow your orders. The line went dead. A cold dread snaked its way down my spine. I knew then, with chilling certainty, that my team and I were being pushed onto a chessboard as pawns, in a game whose rules we didn't know. Before we mounted the helicopters, my platoon sergeant, a devout man from Texas named Sully, gathered our 6-man team. He bowed his head, his voice a low rumble against the thrumming of the rotor blades, reciting a familiar prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. The words hung in the dry, dusty air. An hour later, those words would become an agonizing prophecy. The raid began. We fast-roped from the helicopters under the cloak of pre-dawn darkness. Alpha Team, my team, moved toward the primary target structure. Everything was quiet, too quiet. Just as we breached the entrance, the world erupted. The ground buckled beneath our feet as a perfectly sequenced chain of IEDs detonated, turning the entire courtyard into a fiery killbox. It wasn't a compound, it was a trap. Muzzle flashes erupted from all sides, from darkened windows and concealed positions that the intelligence maps had marked as clear. Ambush! Ambush! My voice, amplified by the comms, was terrifyingly calm. It's the training. In chaos, you become the anchor. Retreat. Plan Bravo, covering fire. We were professionals. We moved with practiced efficiency, but efficiency means nothing when you're facing overwhelming, perfectly prepared enemy fire. I laid down suppression fire with my rifle, the familiar kick against my shoulder, a small point of stability in a world turned to hell. I saw Sully go down, a burst of automatic fire catching him in the leg and chest. I scrambled to him, grabbing the drag handle on his body armor. I started pulling him back towards the only available cover, a low mud brick wall. That's when it happened. A searing, white-hot pain exploded in my left hand. I looked down and saw a piece of shrapnel, a jagged piece of metal from a detonated RPG, had torn through my palm, leaving a bloody, gaping wound. The pain was immense, but the adrenaline was stronger. I kept pulling. I could feel Sully's breathing, shallow and ragged, against my ear. His life was slipping away with every labored gasp. He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth as he spoke, his voice a desperate, gurgling whisper. Major, tell my wife. Tell Sarah I love her. His eyes, wide with pain and fear, locked onto mine. Don't let us die for nothing. Find the truth, ma'am. Find the... Those were his last words. His grip went slack. One by one, they fell. Martinez, Cohen, Jackson, my brothers, the men I had trained with, eaten with, shared stories of home with. The retreat wasn't a tactical withdrawal. It was a slaughter. By some miracle of luck or fate, I was the last one standing, dragged onto the rescue helicopter by the skin of my teeth, a ghost in a storm of fire and blood. I left Afghanistan with a body full of shrapnel and a soul carrying the weight of 6 dead men. The guilt was a physical thing, heavier than any rucksack, a pain far worse than death itself. Days later, I woke up in a pristine white room at the Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany. The physical pain was a dull, distant throb thanks to a morphine drip. The psychological pain, however, was about to become infinitely worse. A stern-faced officer, a man from my father's own circle, delivered the official after-action report. My blood ran cold as I read the words. It said that I, Major Tilda Crane, had hesitated at a critical moment. That my cowardly decision to call a retreat had led to the loss of my team. They had turned me into the scapegoat. The faulty intelligence, the colonel who ignored my warnings, the perfectly laid trap. All of it was gone, buried under a mountain of lies and sealed with a top-secret classification. The wound in my hand was nothing. This was the real injury. This was the ultimate betrayal. They didn't just kill my men. They murdered their honor. If you believe that the truth about their sacrifice must come out, hit the like button. And if you've ever felt betrayed by a system you were taught to trust, comment the word honor below. For Sully and the rest of my team. The memory snapped back into focus. I was in the waiting room, the brass of the compass digging into my unscarred right palm, my left palm throbbing with a phantom ache. The face of the colonel who had sent us to our deaths flashed in my mind, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that he was part of my father's inner circle. Part of the Nightshade Initiative. They had buried the truth once. They would not do it again. The ghost of Sergeant Sully's last words still hung in the air of the small waiting room when the doorknob turned. The memory of the betrayal in Germany receded, leaving me exhausted and hollow. The 60-minute recess was almost over. I braced myself for the next round of this meticulously planned character assassination. But it wasn't a military policeman who entered. It was Captain Elias Vance, my court-appointed lawyer. He looked different. The nervous energy of a junior officer out of his depth was gone. In its place was a quiet, focused determination. He didn't ask about the Nightshade Initiative. He didn't press me for details about the chaos I'd unleashed in the courtroom. Instead, he walked over to the small table and gently placed a steaming styrofoam cup and a small grease-stained paper bag on its surface. The rich, dark aroma of real coffee filled the room, a stark contrast to the burnt, watery excuse for coffee that the military ran on. "I apologize, Major," he said, his voice low and even. He wasn't just referring to the coffee. "I was preparing to defend you against a standard-issue charge. This is something else entirely. I underestimated you, and I underestimated them." I stared at him, then at the offering on the table. Through the paper bag, I could see the round outline of a bagel. It was such a simple, human gesture, so out of place in this sterile environment of judgment and betrayal, that it caught me completely off guard. My voice was rough, rusty from disuse. "Why are you doing this, Captain?" I asked, my question encompassing the coffee, the apology, everything. He pulled up the other metal chair and sat down, not as a lawyer addressing a client, but as an equal. He looked me straight in the eye. "Because my father was a soldier," he began, "a sergeant major. He wasn't a general, he never set foot in the Pentagon. But he taught me that the only thing a soldier truly owns, the one thing no one can take from them, is their honor." He leaned forward, his voice dropping, filled with a sudden intensity. "And your father. He's trying to steal yours. He's trying to burn it to the ground in front of everyone. I won't be a party to that." He paused, letting his words sink in. "So, Major, tell me what Nightshade is, and then you and I are going to figure out how to use it to burn their whole damn house down." For the first time in 3 years, maybe longer, I felt a crack in the fortress I'd built around myself. It wasn't a catastrophic breach, just a small fissure. But it was enough to let a sliver of light in. I had been so alone for so long, fighting a silent war on 2 fronts, one against the enemies overseas, and another against the political animals in my own chain of command, including my own father. To hear someone, a stranger, speak of honor with such raw conviction, it was disarming. He had earned more than just my attention. He had earned a measure of trust. "The coffee first," I said, my voice still a little hoarse. He slid the cup towards me. It was from a 24-hour diner off a highway in Fayetteville, a place well outside the confines of Fort Bragg. He had driven there and back. The coffee was black, strong, and blessedly real. I took a sip, the heat a welcome shock to my system. I unwrapped the bagel. It was still warm, toasted, with a thick layer of cream cheese. Something real. He was right. That's what I needed. I didn't tell him everything about the Nightshade Initiative. Not yet. Trust is built in layers, not given away in a single desperate moment. But I gave him enough. I told him about the flawed intelligence for Operation Sandstorm. I told him about my request to postpone being denied by a colonel I now knew was in my father's pocket. I described the trap, the ambush, the impossible odds. I watched him as I spoke, looking for any sign of doubt, any flicker of disbelief. There was none. He listened, not like a lawyer looking for loopholes, but like a fellow soldier absorbing a battlefield report. He didn't interrupt. He just took out a small government-issue notepad and began to write, his notes concise and methodical. He was mapping out the battlefield. When I finished, he looked up from his notes, his eyes sharp. "Okay, he said, the single word carrying the weight of a decision made. They want to play a game of power and influence. We'll play, but we're going to change the rules. The I had become a we. The shift was subtle, but to me, it was seismic. He stood up as the sound of a buzzer indicated the recess was ending. He handed me a single sheet of paper, a printout from a public records search. This is what I found on Judge Thorne during the break, he said. He has substantial gambling debts. A casino in Atlantic City has a lien against his property. I looked at the paper, then back at him. It was a small piece of information, a single round of ammunition. But it was a start. It was the first brick in our counteroffensive. A man with heavy debts is a man who can be compromised. A man who can be bought. A man who would likely rule in favor of the general who could make his financial problems disappear. I folded the paper and tucked it away. As we walked towards the door, back to the courtroom where my father was waiting to deliver the final blow, I felt something I hadn't felt since before the ambush. I was not alone in this fight. In the heart of the institution that sought to destroy me, I had found an ally. My first chosen family member. The battle wasn't over. In fact, it felt like it was truly just beginning. When Captain Elias Vance pushed open the heavy courtroom door, he and Tilda stepped not back into the hearing they had left, but into an entirely new reality. The air, once thick with contempt and the weight of a pre-decided verdict, was now taut with a different kind of tension. The sharp, electric hum of a sudden power shift. Judge Thorne, the man whose disdain had been a physical presence, was gone. In his place at the bench sat a woman. She wore the deep blue service dress uniform of the United States Air Force, and on each of her shoulders glittered 4 silver stars. She was a full general. Her posture was ramrod straight. Her silver-streaked hair was cut in a severe, no-nonsense style, and her eyes, a pale, icy blue, swept over the room with an unnerving calm. This was General Isolde Vance, a legendary figure in intelligence circles, a woman known for her razor-sharp intellect and an utter lack of patience for political games. She was the Iron Queen of the Air Force. General Alistair Crane, Tilda's father, was on his feet, trying to maintain his composure, but a visible crack had appeared in his granite facade. His eyes, which had held only arrogance before the recess, now darted between the woman on the bench and his daughter, a flicker of raw anxiety betraying his confusion. He had intended to hook a fish. He had somehow summoned a great white shark into his private pond. As Isolde Vance began to arrange a thin file of documents before her, one of Alistair's aides, a young, overeager army captain, moved to intercept her. "General, with all due respect," the captain began, his voice laced with an authority he did not possess, "this is a United States Army tribunal." Isolde Vance did not pause in her task. She didn't even raise her head. She simply looked at him from under her brow, her gaze so cold it could have frozen steam. "It's a matter of national security now, Captain," she stated, her voice quiet but carrying the absolute weight of command. "Step aside." The captain froze, then retreated as if he'd touched a live wire. With the room held in a stunned silence, Isolde Vance finally addressed them all. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the air with the precision of a laser. "By special directive from the office of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff," she announced, each word a hammer blow. "All proceedings and records related to this case are hereby elevated to top secret SCI classification." She let that sink in for a moment before delivering the next blow. "As this is now a matter pertaining to inter-service operational security, the United States Army officially withdraws from any related civil litigation." She then fixed her gaze directly on Alistair Crane, who seemed to shrink slightly in his chair. "General Crane, your formal accusations against Major Tilda Crane have been reviewed at the highest level. They have been found to be predicated on incomplete intelligence and personal bias, and are therefore dismissed. With prejudice." A collective gasp went through the gallery. Elias Vance stood beside Tilda, his mouth slightly agape, staring in disbelief and awe. This was beyond anything he could have imagined. Tilda remained perfectly still, her face a mask of neutrality, her heart hammering against her ribs. But the Iron Queen was not finished. She was not there to simply stop the bleeding, she was there to cauterize the wound. "Furthermore," she continued, her tone unyielding, Major Tilda Crane's military service record is to be immediately amended. Her actions during Operation Sandstorm are to be officially reclassified from negligent to heroic and appropriate to the tactical reality. She is to be considered for the Silver Star for her valor in attempting to save her team under catastrophic conditions. She paused, looking down at her final document. At that exact moment, the courtroom doors opened again, and a crew from the American Forces Network, cameras at the ready, was quietly escorted in. They had been summoned, mysteriously, just minutes before. The bright, invasive light of a camera flared to life. Isolde Vance seemed not to notice. "Finally," she declared, her voice ringing with finality. "Any and all holds on the personal assets and inheritance of Major Tilda Crane, as stipulated in the last will and testament of Eleanor Vance Crane, are to be released. Effective immediately." The flash of the camera caught Alistair Crane at the precise moment his empire crumbled. He didn't shout, he didn't protest, he simply deflated. The proud, unshakable general slumped back into his chair, the color draining from his face until it was a waxy, grayish pallor. The arrogance that had been his armor for decades shattered, not with a bang, but with a silent, pathetic whimper. He had lost, and he had lost publicly, in front of the very system he had so masterfully manipulated for his entire career. The hearing was over. As soon as Isolde Vance stood, the room erupted. Reporters and officers swarmed her, but she moved through them with an effortless grace, her aides forming a protective bubble. Tilda didn't move. She just stood there, watching. Alistair Crane was helped to his feet by two of his aides. For a moment, his path would take him directly past her. This was it, the final confrontation. She prepared herself for a look of hatred, of fury, of anything. She got nothing. As her father walked past, a broken man being led from his own battlefield, he could not bring himself to look at her. His gaze was fixed on the floor, his eyes hollow and defeated. In that moment, watching him shuffle away, Tilda felt no surge of victory. There was no joy, no triumphant satisfaction. There was only a vast, aching emptiness, a profound and sudden grief, not for the man he was, but for the father he had never been. His spectacular downfall hadn't brought her happiness. It was just a necessary, heartbreaking end. I followed General Isolde Vance through a labyrinth of sterile corridors deep within Fort Bragg. We ended up in a skiff, a sensitive compartmented information facility, a windowless room designed to be impenetrable to electronic eavesdropping. The silence inside was absolute, heavy. This was a place where secrets lived and died. Isolde moved to a small counter and poured 2 cups of black coffee from a plain, industrial pot. The gesture was disarmingly normal in a setting that was anything but. She handed one to me. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes held a weariness that I recognized. It was the look of someone who had been fighting a war in the shadows for a very long time. "Major," she began, her voice calm and direct, "I owe you an explanation, and an apology. We should have reached out to you sooner." I didn't say anything, just held the warm cup, waiting. "The term you used in the courtroom, Nightshade Initiative," she continued, "is the operational code name for a top-secret internal investigation I've been leading for the past 2 years. We're hunting a ghost, a mole, or rather, a network of moles embedded deep within our national defense intelligence apparatus." She paused, taking a slow sip of her coffee. "Operation Sandstorm wasn't a mission failure, Tilda. It was a perfectly executed assassination." The air left my lungs. The coffee cup trembled in my hands. I set it down on the metal table before I dropped it. "Assassination? What are you talking about? We were sent to rescue a high-value target." Isolde's eyes were filled with a cold, hard pity. "There was no high-value target. He was bait, a fiction created to justify the mission. The real target was your team. It was Alpha Team. Someone in a very high position wanted you and your entire unit permanently silenced." The room started to spin. My mind flashed back to Sully's last words, to Martinez joking about his son's first baseball game, to Cohen's quiet determination. Their faces, once memories of heroic sacrifice, were now twisted into images of lambs led to the slaughter. The grief that I had carried for 3 years, a heavy but noble burden, suddenly curdled into something else, something poisonous and black. A cold, silent rage began to build in the pit of my stomach. They didn't die in combat. They were murdered. Murdered by the very institution they had sworn an oath to serve. I found my voice, a harsh whisper. Why? Why us? That's the question we've been trying to answer, Isolde said. She gestured to a large monitor on the wall, and with a few taps on a tablet, a complex organizational chart appeared. It was a web of names, shell corporations, and encrypted communication lines. Your team was too good, too effective. You were getting close to disrupting a supply line in that province, a line that this network was using for unsanctioned activities. You weren't supposed to know, but your very presence was a threat. So, they eliminated you. Sully used to quote the Bible sometimes, in his quiet moments. The truth will set you free, he'd say, quoting John 8:32. He was wrong. The truth was a cage. The truth was a shiv in the ribs. Judge Thorne? I asked, my mind racing. A pawn, Isolde said dismissively. A gambling addict with heavy debts. The network used him to keep tabs on you after the Sandstorm incident, to make sure you stayed quiet. When your father filed his ridiculous lawsuit, they saw it as a perfect opportunity to use Thorne to discredit you permanently. Your father's greed and ego made him the perfect tool for them. She zoomed in on one section of the chart. Your father, Alistair, is a link in this chain. A selfish, ambitious man who made a deal with the devil for power and influence. But he is not the mastermind. He's just another symptom of the disease. The disease. It was a good word for it. A cancer that had been metastasizing for years. Isolde pointed to a notation on the chart. This network's roots go deep. We have evidence linking their communication protocols back to the 2011 Langley leak. They've been selling our secrets, manipulating our operations, and weakening us from the inside for over a decade. She finally turned from the screen to face me directly. The weariness in her eyes was still there, but now it was overlaid with a steely resolve. The mastermind, the one at the center of this web, we call him Cerberus. He's brilliant, ruthless, and always 3 steps ahead. I've lost 2 of my best investigative teams trying to get close to him. They were compromised and eliminated. The system is riddled with his people. She let the silence hang in the room, the full weight of her words settling upon me. Cerberus knows we're hunting him now, she said. He knows the name Nightshade. He will be trying to clean house, to erase every link, every piece of evidence. That includes anyone who knows about Sandstorm. Her voice softened, but the intensity remained. I need someone he won't see coming, someone who isn't on my official team roster, someone who operates outside the normal channels, who is fearless, and who has a deeply personal reason to see this through to the end. She looked me in the eye. The unspoken question was a formal invitation. I need you, Tilda. The grief for my men was still there, a hot, aching void in my chest. But now, it had a target. The rage that had been building inside me finally had a direction. This was no longer about my mother's inheritance or my father's betrayal. This was about Sully, and Martinez, and Cohen, and the 3 others who died in the dust because of a lie. This was about a debt of blood. What are my orders, General? I asked. Before I could hunt for Cerberus, before I could fully step into the new war that General Isolde Vance had drafted me into, there was one final ghost I had to lay to rest. A ghost that wore my father's face. I arranged the meeting. Not at a home, not at a public place, but in the sterile, soulless conference room of a defense contractor in McLean, Virginia. A place with no memories, no sentiment, a place of transactions. It was fitting. He was already there when I arrived. Alistair Crane looked like a man who had aged a decade in a matter of days. The powerful, immaculate uniform of a 4-star general was gone, replaced by an expensive gray suit that hung on his frame, looking rumpled and defeated. The illusion of his power had been stripped away, and all that was left was a tired, old man. He started with the expected platitudes, his voice strained. Tilda, I'm sorry for how things. I cut him off. My voice was quiet, but it held the unyielding edge of honed steel. Let's skip the meaningless apologies, Alistair. I'm not here for a reconciliation. I'm here for one thing. I want to know why. He flinched at the use of his first name. To him, I was no longer his daughter. I was an interrogator. He looked around the bland gray room as if searching for an escape route. There wasn't one. The truth was the only door. It was after Sandstorm. He finally began, his voice a low mumble, his gaze fixed on his hands clasped on the polished table. An intermediary approached me, a man with powerful connections. He explained that this man represented a consortium of private interests with deep ties to the military-industrial complex. They knew about the botched operation. They knew it was a setup. They made me an offer, he confessed, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. A substantial sum of money, enough to live like a king after retirement, enough to secure the family's legacy for generations. And the price? I asked, though I already knew the answer. My silence, he whispered. I was to accept the official report, the one that blamed you. I was to use my influence to ensure it was never questioned. They told me your career was over anyway, that you'd never serve again after your injuries. They said it was a way to salvage something from the wreckage. He finally looked at me, his eyes pleading, searching for a flicker of understanding, of the old familial duty he had always taken for granted. He found none. What he found instead was the most disgusting, self-serving part of his confession. I did it for you, Tilda, he insisted, his voice rising with a desperate false conviction. Your career was finished. I wanted to use that money to make sure you had a comfortable life, to ensure you were taken care of. The lie was so audacious, so perfectly in character with the man I'd known my whole life, that I didn't even feel anger. I just felt a profound, chilling emptiness, the ultimate manipulation, to commit an act of profound betrayal and frame it as an act of fatherly love. I let the silence hang in the air, a testament to the magnitude of his deceit. I let him stew in it, let him hear the echo of his own pathetic justification. When I finally spoke, my voice was devoid of all emotion. It was the voice of a judge delivering a final sentence. That family legacy you were so keen to protect was built on a foundation of 6 bodies, Alistair. 6 soldiers who trusted me. They trusted this system. They trusted men like you to have their backs. I leaned forward slightly. Sergeant Sully had a wife named Sarah and a son who had just learned to throw a baseball. Corporal Martinez was saving up to buy his mother a small house in El Paso. They weren't abstract losses on a report. They were men, and you sold their honor, their memory, and your own daughter for a bank account. Every word was a precisely aimed shot, stripping away the layers of self-delusion he had wrapped himself in. He visibly crumpled, the last of his defenses turning to dust. The mask was gone. All that was left was the weak, greedy man underneath. But we're still family, Tilda, he stammered, a desperate last-ditch appeal to a bond he himself had severed. We can fix this. Slowly, I stood up from the table. The meeting was over. My quest for answers was over. Everything was over. No, I said, my voice as calm and final as a closing grave. We can't. I looked at him one last time, not with hatred, but with a deep, sorrowful clarity. Family doesn't do what you did. My mother, Eleanor, she was my family. The men who died under my command, they were my family. You. I shook my head slowly. You are no longer my father. You are just a man who made a choice, a terrible, unforgivable choice. And now, you have to live with it. I turned my back on him and walked out of the gray room, leaving him alone with nothing but the company of his own betrayal. I didn't look back. The past was finally where it belonged, behind me. And I was free. A few days after I walked away from my father, I drove my truck east towards the hollowed grounds of Arlington National Cemetery. The Virginia sky was a cruel, brilliant blue, a stark contrast to the gray landscape of my own heart. I parked and walked through the gates, leaving the noise of the living world behind. The silence here was different. It wasn't empty, it was full of stories, of final breaths, of promises kept and broken. I walked past the endless, orderly rows of white headstones, each one a life, a sacrifice, a family left behind. I didn't head towards the sections with famous names or grand monuments. My path led me to a quieter, more solemn part of the cemetery, a gentle slope overlooking the city, a place some call Nameless Hill. This is where soldiers who could not be identified are laid to rest, their graves marked only with the words, "A comrade in arms, known but to God." It felt like the right place, a fitting memorial for the buried truth of Operation Sandstorm. I found a small, quiet section and stood before 6 of these anonymous markers. They would represent my men. In the pocket of my jacket, I carried 6 small, smooth stones, worn by the currents of the Potomac River, which I had gathered myself at dawn that morning. It's a tradition, one I learned from a Jewish comrade years ago. Flowers wilt and die, but a stone is a permanent testament. It says, "I was here. I remember you." It's a promise that your memory endures. One by one, I took them out. I knelt and placed the first stone on the cool marble, Sergeant Michael Sully Sullivan. I remembered his quiet faith, his easy smile, and his fierce love for his wife Sarah. I could almost hear his voice, a low Texas drawl. "Just do the right thing, Major. The rest is just noise." The second stone. Corporal David Doc Rivera, our medic. The calmest man I ever knew, who could stitch a wound in the middle of a firefight while humming a tune from a Broadway show. He was saving for a down payment on a clinic back home. The third stone, Sergeant Marcus Preacher Jones. He wasn't religious, we just called him that because he could quote Shakespeare and philosophy like it was scripture. He was the soul of our team. I continued the silent ritual. I named each one in my heart. Jackson, Cohen, Martinez, 6 stones for 6 men. I didn't cry. Tears felt too small, too fleeting for a loss this vast. Instead, as my fingers brushed against the cold marble, a new kind of resolve settled deep within me, hardening my grief into something solid and unyielding, like the stones I had left behind. They were good soldiers. The voice came from behind me, startling me out of my reverie. It was General Isolde Vance. She stood a respectful distance away, her hands clasped behind her back. I had no idea how long she had been watching. "They deserved better than what they got," she said, walking slowly to stand beside me, her gaze on the 6 nameless graves. "They deserve justice, Tilda. And you are the only one who can give it to them." She turned to face me, her expression serious. "I didn't just bring you into the fold to be an advisor. I'm officially asking you to lead a new unit. A small, elite task force, operating completely off the books. You will have carte blanche, access to any resource you require, and you will answer to no one but me. Your mission: hunt Cerberus. Dismantle his network, piece by piece, and bring him down." It was the offer I had been waiting for, the purpose I had been searching for in the ashes of my old life. But the Tilda who had led Operation Sandstorm was gone. The Tilda who blindly trusted the system was gone. In her place was someone who understood the true cost of failure. I looked from the graves back to the general. "I have conditions," I said, my voice steady. Isolde nodded, unfazed. "I would expect nothing less." "1," I began, ticking the points off in my mind. "I have total and complete authority to select my own team. No oversight, no recommendations from the Pentagon. My people. My choice." "Agreed." 2. You are my only point of contact. No intermediaries, no colonels in a command center thousands of miles away. I report directly to you, and only to you." "Agreed." I took a breath. This was the most important one. This was the promise I was making to any person brave or crazy enough to follow me into this new war. And 3. Any member of my team, past or present, will have their family enrolled in a special benefits program. Full college tuition for their children, lifetime health care, and mortgage forgiveness. If the worst happens, their families will be secure. For life. This is non-negotiable. Isolde Vance didn't hesitate for a second. Done, she said. Consider it arranged. She extended her hand. So, what's the designation for this new unit? I looked back at the 6 stones, gleaming faintly under the Virginia sun. 6 men, from different backgrounds, with different stories, forged into one unit by fire and loyalty. My new team would be the same. We'll be called Task Force Chimera, I said, because we will be a monster made of disparate parts, united by a single, deadly purpose. As I stood there, making that promise, I thought about all the forgotten soldiers and all the families left behind. This fight was for my men, but it's also for them. If you have a loved one who has served, or if you simply believe that their sacrifice should never be forgotten, I want you to do one thing for me. Just comment with their name, or simply the word, remember, below. Let's fill this space with their honor. My mission was clear. The debt would be paid. My war against Cerberus didn't begin in a war room filled with monitors and maps. It began on the open highways of America, with a series of quiet conversations in living rooms and coffee shops. General Vance had given me carte blanche, but I wasn't looking for soldiers from the official files. The system that had created this mess could not be trusted to fix it. I was looking for something else. I was recruiting from a different list. The next of kin report from Operation Sandstorm. My first stop was a quiet suburb in San Antonio, Texas. I found him in his garage, meticulously cleaning a set of old ham radio equipment. He was Hector Rivera, the father of my fallen medic, Doc Rivera. Before he retired, Hector had been one of the NSA's top signals intelligence analysts. He was a ghost who knew how to listen to the world's whispers. He looked up as I approached, his eyes old but sharp. There was no surprise in them. I've been waiting for this call for 3 years, Major, he said, wiping his hands on a rag. His voice was steady, imbued with a grief that had long ago hardened into purpose. My son didn't die because of a tactical error. I knew it in my gut. Tell me what you need. He had lost his son, but his skills were sharper than ever, fueled now by a father's need for vengeance. He was the first member of Task Force Chimera. Not every conversation was that easy. My next stop was Seattle, a city of rain and restless tech geniuses. I found Preacher Jones's younger brother, Leo, in a cramped apartment that smelled of stale pizza and ozone. He was a virtuoso hacker, a digital phantom who could dance through firewalls like they were made of smoke. But his eyes were full of a bitter, cynical anger. I don't want anything to do with the military, he said flatly, not even looking up from his bank of monitors. It took my brother. It's a machine that eats good men and spits out flags for their funerals. I didn't try to persuade him with patriotism or duty. I didn't have the right. I'm not asking you to work for the military, Leo, I said quietly, standing by the door. I'm asking you to help me find the men who murdered your brother. I left my number on his cluttered desk and walked out. A week later, at 2 a.m, my phone buzzed with an encrypted message. It just said, I'm in. From there, the pieces began to fall into place. Task Force Chimera started to take shape, a strange and broken family bound by loss. I found a former CIA case officer, disgraced, and pushed out for getting too close to a truth a lot like mine, now running a failing bookstore in Vermont. He was our expert in tradecraft and human intelligence. I flew to a small, dusty town in West Texas to meet Sarah Sullivan, Sully's widow. I had dreaded this meeting more than any other, preparing myself for anger, for blame. Instead, she opened her front door, looked at me for a long moment, and then pulled me into a fierce, unexpected hug. Sully always said you were the best damn commander he ever had, she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. He trusted you. Now go make it mean something. That hug washed away the last of the guilt I had carried. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a commission. A mandate. A few months later, Sarah called me. She had enrolled in a demolitions course at a technical college. I want to understand what happened to him, she explained, her voice hardening with a new resolve. I want to know exactly how they built the bomb that killed my husband, and then I want to help you take them apart, piece by piece. She became our explosives expert. The final piece was Elias Vance. After the tribunal, he couldn't go back. He had seen behind the curtain. He resigned his commission with the JAG Corps and, without any hesitation, became our team's legal counsel and moral compass, the one who would keep our quest for vengeance from turning into a blind vendetta. We were a collection of ghosts, has-beens, and broken people. We were not perfect soldiers. We were something more dangerous. We were a family with a singular, burning purpose. We were the Chimeras. Before we began our first operation, there was one last thing I had to do. One final stone to lay. I drove through the manicured, wealthy streets of McLean at dusk, parking a block away from the house I grew up in. My father's house. I didn't go to the front door. I slipped through an unlocked side gate, a path I knew from my teenage years, and made my way to his ground floor study. As I suspected, the window was unlocked. He always liked the air, a small vulnerability in his fortress of a life. I slid it open and slipped inside. The room was just as I remembered it, smelling of leather, whiskey, and self-importance. And there it was, the grand mahogany desk where he had signed orders, built his career, and, I now knew, sold his soul. The place where he had condemned my men and me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a seventh stone. This one wasn't smooth and gray from the Potomac. It was a piece of jagged, sharp-edged granite I had picked up from a quarry. It was rough, unforgiving. I placed it squarely in the center of his polished desk, a dark, ugly thing on a pristine surface. It wasn't a memorial. It was a marker, a silent, damning reminder of the price of his betrayal, a promise that he would never be allowed to forget. I slipped back out the window, leaving the stone and the ghost of his honor behind. The past was settled. It was time to go to work. The stone I left on my father's desk was the period at the end of a long, painful chapter of my life. The story that began now was a new book entirely, written not in ink, but in action. Our war room was a repurposed underground communications hub in a forgotten corner of rural Virginia, a ghost of the Cold War given new life. Here, there were no polished mahogany desks or portraits of decorated generals. There were just concrete walls, humming servers, and the focused, intense faces of Task Force Chimera. We were gathered around the central holographic display. On it, a map of the Port of Baltimore glowed, overlaid with streams of data. Hector Rivera, Doc's father, pointed a steady finger at a block of encrypted code moving through a supposedly secure shipping channel. "There it is," he said, his voice quiet but resonating with the certainty of a master craftsman. "It's their signature, the same deliberately flawed intelligence packet structure they used to set up Sandstorm. They're baiting a trap." He looked up at me, his old eyes burning with a cold fire. "They're preparing to sacrifice another team." I looked around the room at my team. Hector, the veteran analyst who had turned his grief into a search for truth. Leo Jones, the cynical hacker from Seattle, his fingers now flying across the keyboard with a righteous fury. Sarah Sullivan, Sully's widow, her quiet demeanor belying an expert's knowledge of everything that explodes. The stoic ex-CIA officer who we simply called the bookseller. And Elias Vance, the lawyer who had traded his uniform for a place in the shadows with us. They were all looking at me. Not with doubt or fear, but with a steady, unwavering trust. In their faces, I saw a reflection of my own journey. I saw pain. I saw resilience. And I saw a purpose that was bigger than any one of us. I was no longer the woman who stood trial at Fort Bragg. I was no longer a victim of my father's ambition or a survivor haunted by ghosts. I was their commander. And we were no longer the prey. We were the hunters. "We know their playbook," I said, my voice clear and sharp in the quiet room. "They think we're the targets. They think they're setting another trap to eliminate a loose end." I let my gaze rest on each member of my team. They don't know that this time, the trap isn't for us. It's for them. Operation Sandstorm was meant to be our end. Instead, we're going to make it their beginning of the end. I walked to the front of the room, standing before the glowing map. Operation Sandstorm took the people we loved most, I continued, my voice low but carrying the weight of a vow. It left us with scars that will never fully heal. It broke us. But it also gave us something. It gave us a weapon that Cerberus and his network can never defend against. We know how they think. We know how they operate. We have seen their methods firsthand, paid for with the blood of our own. The legacy of Sandstorm is not our loss. The legacy of Sandstorm is us. The words weren't just a speech. They were an oath, a shared creed that bound us together, tighter than any blood relation. We were no longer a collection of broken individuals. We were one entity, a single weapon aimed at the heart of the conspiracy. I turned back to the tactical table, where our equipment was laid out with military precision. I picked up my sidearm, the cold, familiar weight of it a comfort in my hand. I chambered around, the sound a sharp, definitive click in the silence. My eyes fell on my mother's brass compass, which sat on the edge of the table. For years, it had been my anchor, my connection to a past that gave me strength. I picked it up, ran my thumb over its smooth surface one last time, a silent thank you and a final goodbye. Then, I slipped it deep into my bag. I didn't need it to find my way anymore. I was the way. I looked at my team, my family. They were ready. The ghosts of the past were no longer haunting us. They were marching with us. Let's go, I said. Dawn is coming. Together, we walked out of the underground briefing room, out of the shadows of our past, and into the cool pre-dawn air. Our first mission, Operation Night Mirror, was about to begin. The war of Major Tilda Crane was not over. It had just truly begun. My story so far has been about finding justice. The story that comes next is about delivering it. The war against Cerberus has just begun, and Task Force Chimera is on the hunt. I want to thank you for being here, for listening, for standing with me when I felt alone. Your support and your comments have been a light in the darkness. To be on the front lines for our next mission, make sure you subscribe to the Chosen Revenge channel and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss a single moment. We have a war to win.